house in Baltimore, well as any sports fan. The Caps are playing. We got the Wizards playing. Terps are playing basketball. We got football games going on this weekend. And Luke settled out into College Park on Tuesday night. I almost went. I almost sent Luke a text and said, hey, let's get in the car and go to College Park. And Luke's like, I'm already in College Park. Luke, it was, we hope for the best with the Terps, right? And we know that this isn't last year's team from a talent standpoint. It's all wishful thinking. But it kind of unraveled on them a little bit Tuesday night.
Well, I mean, we've seen this thing from Maryland that they've done early in the season where they fall behind and they've been able to come back. We saw it over the weekend. We've seen it even against teams like Towson early in the season. We know that Maryland's starting 3 freshmen at this point. And when you're relying on coming back in the second half, eventually you're going to fall off the tightrope at some point. And Maryland certainly did that on Tuesday night.
Yeah, well, these are the laugher games, not Pittsburgh, but when the laughers aren't laughers, when you're struggling with Towson, when you're in it with Stony Brook and Richmond almost beat you, you sort of should know where you are, right? I mean, we don't need to overstate that, right?
Well, I don't totally agree with that from a standpoint of I think the ceiling is really high for this team, but as I just said, they're relying on a lot of freshmen. They have Mello Trimble. DeMonte Dodd is sort of kind of been a starter.
Yeah, I've been waiting on him forever. That's never going to happen, is it?
Right. I mean, he's going to give you. You're hoping he gives you a little bit of good defense, rebounds, blocks some shots, but he's not going to do anything for you offensively. But they're relying on Anthony Cowan. They're relying on Justin Jackson and Kevin Herter. And all 3 of them, especially the first 2 I mentioned, have done some brilliant things already. And that's where you have a lot of optimism, not just for as this season progresses, but in the future. But as you pointed out, they've played a lot of close games, and they've played some close games against some teams that you wouldn't expect to be all that close. And then, you see what happened against Pitt on Tuesday night.
Well, you've also seen the other Big Ten teams stumble and fall against. I mean, they've lost some of these games. This is the first one the Terps couldn't climb. They climbed. I mean, 4 minutes left to go. I thought they might win. I mean, it was an 8-point game. They might win, right?
Yeah, I mean, they were trailing by 25 with about 15 minutes to go. And they cut it to 8. They even had a chance. Anthony Cowan missed the front end of a 1-and-1. And then on the next possession was out of control going to the basket. That was kind of what did them in. There were a few minutes left at that point, and then Pitt, they never got any closer than that, and then Pitt pushed the lead back into low double digits.
Well, when you're down 25, you have to score on every possession.
Sure. It's just something that isn't easily done. I mean, as much as they've pulled together some impressive comebacks, I mean, the Georgetown comeback was nothing short of miraculous. You can't count on doing that all the time. And, I think what you saw with Pitt, you saw a team that has some really good length, and they played a 2-3 zone really effectively, and Maryland hit some shots early on. They were 4 from their first 6 from beyond the arc, and then after that, they missed their next 16 three-pointers. I mean, that kind of tells the story of the game right there. I mean, this isn't a team that has great inside scorers, so, there are other ways to attack a zone, but one of the ways is to shoot from the outside, and Maryland didn't do that. So when you have that happen, and then you let poor shot selection impact your defense, that's when a game gets out of hand, and that's what happened to Maryland. And, I think, first of all, I wouldn't be all that terribly disappointed about this. They weren't going to go undefeated. I think this team has a very good chance to be an NCAA tournament team before it's all said and done, but they're young. And you're going to have some games where when you're relying on kind of figuring things out and needing to come back, that it's just not going to happen for you, and that was the case on Tuesday night.
Well, it always helps when the shots go down, right? I mean, when they're shooting those threes and some of them are going in, they're going to be all right. When none of them are going in, they're going to be behind by 25, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly something that they're going to rely on a lot. Justin Jackson's been terrific from beyond the arc, and certainly we know Mello Trimble can shoot from out there. I mean, they have some other guys who can stick some shots, Kevin Herter being one of them. But, I think something else that we haven't pointed out, and actually Pitt head coach Kevin Stallings said this, really opened his post-game press conference with it. Maryland played over the weekend. They played Friday and Saturday night. They played late Saturday night. They get home from New York City, and you have to turn around almost right away to get ready for a Pitt team. Now, that's probably not that big of a deal for guys like Melo Trimble, but when you're talking about 18-year-old freshmen that you're counting on,
Yeah, but wait till they have to fly out to Illinois on a Monday when it's 4 degrees in Champaign, and then get on the plane and go to Iowa and play, because all that's happening, right? I mean, to me, that's they had 2 days off. I mean, they really did, and they were home, and there was energy, right? I mean, there was some energy there. With the kids on, there was a reason to come out. They came out really flat, right?
Well, they actually started. They started fast. Then they really, they built an early lead, and then they just stopped hitting shots. I mean, I think the fatigue is a factor when you're talking about 18-year-olds who aren't used to doing that kind of Friday and Saturday, and then you come back and play Tuesday night. Look, I'm not saying it's the main reason why they lost, but if you're looking for reasons why they didn't play well, I think that's probably one of them.
Well, at least they got a Canadian kid, so he'll handle the cold. He'll love it out there in Champaign and Lincoln and wherever else they're headed in the middle of the year. For Melo Trimble, I guess so much is expected of him now, right? Like, if it was about pressure last year and about friction within the room, well, the pressure's still going to be here, because in the end, the ball's going to be, if it's not him, I guess it's Herter at some point, and Herter's going to grow up, and he will only be a freshman so long, and I see that kid as, where's he going to be 2 years from now? That is the exciting part of this, is to say, well, hey, they got some of these young kids, and if they play 2 seasons from now with those guys, maybe they're a top 10 team by then, but maybe they can beat a few top 10 teams between now and then. I'm not shocked that they lost, but I do think that the one thing about these young players, it really is spotty, right? I mean, this is a Jekyll Hyde operation through 8 games when you fall behind, get outscored, 45-20, and then come back and outscore someone else 29-7 or 29-10 or whatever it was when they got back into the game on Tuesday night. It's very streaky what's going on with them right now.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the story of when you're counting on freshmen. I mean, you mentioned Melo Trimble. Only had 13 points on Tuesday night. Didn't get to the free throw line. And again, you look at Pittsburgh's length. You look at their 2-3 zone. I mean, they did a fantastic job protecting the rim, not allowing anyone to get to the basket. We know that's when Melo Trimble's at his best. Yeah, he's hitting some outside shots, but it's him going to the rack and drawing fouls, finishing at the rim. If not finishing, hitting his free throws. And he only shot 4 free throws on Tuesday night. I mean, that stat right there might be the biggest story of the game, at least from the offensive side, as anything. I mean, I mentioned the long drought they had, missed 16 straight three-pointers at one point on Tuesday.
Also, by the way, when you're down 25 points, it's much like an offense running the ball, when you're behind, right? You're down 25 points. Melo's not, with 14 minutes left, you're just shooting threes at that point, right? I mean, literally, that's what the game became, so you take away that part of the offense, right?
It can certainly get that way. And, I mean, you have enough time that you don't have to just be relying on threes. I mean, really, until you get down to the last few minutes of a situation like that, that's when you kind of get into that situation where you have to just be shooting from beyond the arc. Again, I mean, the Pittsburgh, the way they played, I mean, there's a lot of length in that starting lineup. I mean, you look at the fact that Jamel Artis, the Baltimore native, playing a lot of point for them, and, I mean, you look at him, he's, 6'7"? I mean, you don't see that at the collegiate level. I mean,
sort of Magic Johnson-y kind of length for the college game, right?
Yeah, I mean, their starting lineup, 6'7", 6'9", 6'6", 6'8", 6'8". I mean, that's not an NBA team because you don't have a 7-footer in there or that 6'11" guy, but, that's more size than Maryland has.
Sounds like last year's Maryland team.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So, I think I would not be shocked before it's all said and done. Pitt was 5-1 going into this game. Wouldn't be surprised if they're a team that, is a top 25 team at some point. I mean, I don't think Maryland lost to a garbage team on Tuesday night whatsoever. I mean, I think if they play them again, a little more rest and, maybe a little later in the season, give these freshmen a little more of a chance to mature, then I think you could have a different story. But, this was Pitt just outclassed Maryland on Tuesday. There's no way to sugarcoat
Fair enough,
it. I mean,
yeah.
You look at that first half, you fall behind by 21 points at halftime. You're going to get your feelings hurt 9.5 out of 10 times at that point. It just, you chalk it up to they weren't going to go undefeated. They got off to a 7-0 start. They need to shoot better from the outside. They need to run better half-court offense, which, let's face it, has been a Mark Turgeon team issue all along.
And I'm sure we'll be talking more about that as the season unfolds because, he has Clay here, right? I mean, he has a bunch of pliable young guys who want to be in the program coming in after a year where they had major success, in a year where the Big Ten isn't sort of loaded like it is on the football side, right? At least the perception isn't that they're going to play 3 of the top 5 teams in the country twice. They're not going to do that. So, I think there is some room for growth here, and these questions we have about what kind of a teacher Mark Turgeon is. The one thing you would love to have said about Gary Williams' teams every year, well, they're better in March than they are in December. Some were, some weren't. Some was about the players. Some might have been about the coaching. Some might have been about the system and it working. Some might have been about the opponents and what Duke and North Carolina looked like in those years. But by and large, we see potential in this. I'm bought in. Now, show me a better basketball team in February and March than what we've seen the first 7 weeks, which wasn't a bad basketball team, but it's a little bit of a riot squad, a little bit of a cardiac squad when you're coming back from 15, 20 points down or going nose-to-nose with Towson for 40 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it really is going to be interesting to see how this team develops. I mean, already you're seeing different, LG Dill, who we saw a lot more earlier in the season. He only had 3 minutes on Tuesday night. Jared Nickens is very clearly falling out of favor. Hit his first 3-pointer.
Yeah, I remember when he used to play, right?
Yeah, there's a guy who's been in a 2-year-long shooting slump. So, you're seeing him lose minutes. It's been interesting to see what Michael Tchaikovsky's been able to do. Yvonne Bender has given them some spark, although didn't really do much of anything on Tuesday night. But, I think short of injuries, which, you never know with that. And certainly Melo Trimble was dealing with his share of being less than 100% as last year progressed. But short of injuries, I don't see any reason why this team won't be better as the year goes on because you do have such young talent. Now, post-play, I think is definitely a concern, is definitely something that will be worth monitoring moving forward.
Yeah, they're almost never going to be the biggest team on the floor, right? In the Big Ten.
They have some size, but it's one thing to say you have size. It's another thing if those guys have any skill.
Yeah, then you say the size is DeMonte Dodd, and you're like, oh, okay. Right.
Exactly. I mean, are they going to have a post scorer? And that's where, Tchaikovsky might be able to give them some of that. But, can he do that on a consistent basis? That remains to be seen. But when you have these freshmen and you have Melo Trimble, who as good as any player you'll find in the Big Ten, I really believe that. I think we've already seen a healthy version of him, how good he's been, and you look at how he played in the Barclays Classic over the weekend, almost willing Maryland to win in both of those games. But, Justin Jackson's been really impressive. Didn't have a great night on Tuesday night, but has been terrific from beyond the arc, and he's someone who has some ability to get to the rim as well. Certainly plays that kind of stretch forward role, 6'7", but has arms that make him seem more like a 6'10" guy and able to rebound. And Anthony Cowan, I think you already see similarities between him and what you saw from Melo Trimble as a freshman. So I think they finally have that backup point guard, that guy who can handle the point, allow Melo to either slide to the 2 or get some rest for a few minutes here and there over the course of 40 minutes. Last year they had Jalen Brantley doing that, and you've seen Cowan really cut into his minutes. So, I really like this team. I do. They're not as talented as last year's team just yet. Certainly not as high profile, and certainly these guys are freshmen, whereas last year you had the hired guns coming in. Diamond Stone was a freshman, but we knew he was a one-and-done guy. Suleiman being the grad transfer, and even Robert Carter being a transfer as well. You knew that was going to be fleeting, whether they ended up making it to the Final Four or not. You knew that we
weren't going to get to know them. We were going to date them. We weren't going to marry them.
Yeah, you knew there wasn't going to be this sense of building with that team, other than just within that season. And unfortunately for last year's team, they did make it to the Sweet 16. So I want to be cautious and not labeling it a failure, but you never really got the sense that they got any better. What they were in December largely felt like what they were.
Oh, I don't know. I thought they fell apart. I thought they were far better in December and January.
Fall apart might be strong, but certainly they didn't rise to the occasion. There's no doubt about that, and probably. I don't think it was blatant, but I think there was probably times where there was some selfishness in how
they
guys
lost
played.
to Minnesota, right? I mean, that just kind of told you, when that happened, you're like, you knew where the bottom could be. You knew that the bottom could fall out.
Yeah, I mean, you knew at that point that they weren't. They just weren't going to be that team that was going to be consistent enough to make it to a
I
Final
believed
Four.
less every day, literally. I mean, I can't remember a team that I thought on January 10th or whenever that game was where they were winning by, Ohio State, weren't they up 40-8 or something crazy in a home game early in the Big Ten? And I was like, wow, they can win the national. They're that good. And then they just broke your heart. This team here, I agree, there's some scrappiness involved. There is a little bit of they might be in over their head, on certain nights, and it certainly appeared that way on Tuesday night, that when they're on the floor with Wisconsin, Indiana, Michigan State, they're not going to have the most talent. They're going to need a lot to go right, and they're going to need to mature, and the good news is they don't play Michigan State until March 5th, right? So, and it's my dad's birthday, so they should win that one.
There you go. But, I mean, they don't have as much polished talent, but I do think the raw talent is there, that this team, even if Melo Trimble leaves after his junior season.
And we all expect that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you would think so. But even if that happens, I've seen enough from Anthony Cowan in that role. Now, is he going to be a guy that is going to score 25 points a game, have that kind of ability? I don't know about that, but has certainly shown similar trait, and with Justin Jackson and Herder, and keep in mind this team has more talent coming in next year, and they have some freshmen aren't even playing right now. I mean, there's some intrigue about this team. Again, I think before it's all said and done, this is going to be a team that has a good chance to be in the NCAA tournament, and it's kind of where you looked at the team 2 years ago, although they had Des Wells, who had a little more veteran leadership for them, but. I see a bright future for this team, and as you said, I think this is going to be a really interesting case study, an interesting test for Mark Turgeon as far as he's got these freshmen. You really don't view any of these guys as being, early leaving for the NBA or anything like that. Who knows? A couple years from now, maybe Justin Jackson will be that guy, but right now, these look like guys who are going to be here for the long term, and how much better can they get? How much better can they get this year and then really over the next couple years? I mean, I've been talking to a couple of my friends who are big into Maryland basketball, been fans their whole life, going back to, at least my generation, going back to watching in the early 90s and Joe Smith arriving and Keith Booth and the run of Sweet 16 teams and finally winning a title. But, talking to a couple of my friends, they've already said they're enjoying watching these young guys more than last year's team.
Well, you can build into this. These kids are going to be here 2 years from now, right?
Yeah. And I think last year, I mean, what you said, whether you label it that they collapsed or fell apart or anything like that, I mean, they still made it to the Sweet 16. That's still not something that should be taken for granted. But I think there was such a frustration watching that team because they never consistently got to be as good as you thought they could be. And I think with this year's team, and there's always a certain romantic feeling about freshmen, right? There's always this thought that this guy's going to end up becoming a great player
next
over the next
thing,
4 years.
the next Jordan, right? Exactly.
Yeah, or even just the next Juan Dixon. I mean,
fair enough.
But I know plenty of times
a guy that cuts nets down. Let's just define it like that.
In this case, you have some really talented young players. There's an enthusiasm. I think you've seen Melo Trimble already. Not just play better, not just look more explosive. The health part was a major factor for him last year, but I don't know. His body language, his demeanor, he seems like he's having more fun.
He looks like he's a leader now, right?
Yeah, and I think he wanted to do that last year, but it's tough when you're a sophomore and you have a guy like Rashid Suleiman, who, by the way, I'm not disparaging him, but you have him, and you have a freshman in Diamond Stone who's all about, okay, I just want to have some big games and get to the NBA, and you have when you have some guys like that, and then you had what Trimble did his freshman year, and then going into his sophomore year, that was a tough spot for him to be in when you really think about it. And I'm not making an excuse for him or that team, but it was just that hired gun kind of feeling. Whereas this feels like an opportunity that Mark Turgeon can really build a team. You know, Mello, Trimble for this year. You know, maybe he comes back for a senior year, maybe he doesn't, but you've got enough other intriguing young talent here that, you know, I think things could be really fun in College Park over the next couple years.
Luke Jones covers all things Terrapins and Turtles. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Baltimore Luke, and always reach him at Luke at WNST.net. I am Nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And we are tweeting some Terps as well out on the internet if you want to follow along during the games. And, of course, out into Owings Mills, getting ready to squish the fish on Sunday, doing live radio shows, swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry, and celebrating 25 years. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports